Hey Shrish, what's up? Welcome back to Magnifloss, the channel where we pretty much talk about anything and everything, whatever's on our minds, at more or less the present point in time. The screen edition from me this time, because I want to share with you a presentation I gave last week on deformation and fracture for my 660 seminar course, which is basically run entirely by student presentations, by students, not their presentations. The students give the presentations. But to summarize here, I basically died because some of the topics here, like finite element analysis, have entire courses on them, and I, being the stupid person that I am, tried using the Feynman technique to try to understand every little detail in this thing and explain everything from the ground up, which is just not feasible given the limited amount of time that we had, and was just going way over the top. So I wasted a lot of time and I fell behind in some coursework, but I think slowly I am getting back into the groove of things, and the presentation did end up going well, thanks to also the help of my partner, Guanlin Wang. So let's just get into this presentation. I just want to share with you some basic insights from this awesome subtopic of CG. So deformation and fracture, these are both very interesting topics that are basically ubiquitous in computer graphics these days, especially, and this is kind of an extreme example, in this movie Kung Fu Panda, where Po, the main character, is a walking, talking example of a deformable body. And there we also have an example of fracture, where the building just breaks and shatters into all these different fractured little pieces. So I'm just going to go into how some of this kind of stuff is done. This is also applied everywhere else.
This is 2-minute paper,
such as if you want to simulate, well, in the first slide there was this tearing of bread. If you want to simulate things like the tearing of meat, or in this case, tearing of this soda can or whatever that was supposed to be, or the simulation of faces, or some dude getting sucker punched in the face. So basically, this is just some math formalism for making precise what we exactly mean by deformation, so that later on we can be precise and come up with a mathematical theory for it. But basically, skipping through some of this stuff, one technique for achieving deformation is kind of this manual approach, where the artist takes their 3D object here, such as this fish, and places it inside a 3D lattice of points that they can use to deform the model inside it. So this is called free-form deformation, and it's not based on any kind of physics. But while this is great for animation purposes or, modeling, this is not so great for making Kung Fu Panda, which relies on a lot of physics. And so, skipping through some of this stuff, one basic assumption that we can make to get a basic theory for what it means to be a solid object is by assuming that everything is an elastic material, which means as soon as I deform this material in some way, it'll always want to snap back to its original position. There's no fracturing, there's no, sometimes when you bend something too much, it just stays that way. None of that stuff is allowed. Just everything always wants to come back to its rest pose. If we make this assumption, then we have basically what this is saying is a very basic theory of what it means to be a solid. You can see our homeboy Newton here. His Newton's second law is basically what this first equation here is talking about. And once we have these equations, we can use this thing called the finite element method, which, if you're an engineer, you know this all too well, where you basically discretize your mesh into many different smaller triangles and run your equations on each of the little triangles in order to get a generalized effect. As you can see here for this tool, the different colors represent the amount of stress that is exhibited by each different part. The redder, the more stress this tool is exhibiting in those areas. And so if you're able to simulate all those equations triangle by triangle and solve for all the forces on the inner nodes of this mesh, such as this panda here, then you can pretty much simulate the little bouncy behavior that we saw in the movie there. This is a very high level discussion. There's a lot more to this, but that's pretty much the basic idea. And then my partner talked about fracture and how that is done. One cool approach is by already having our structure that we want to break, such as in this video game we have a bunch of things that are just being destroyed, bunch of pillars here.
She's making a break for it.
Just being crumbled, and one of the ways that the crumbles are simulated is by having every pillar, for example, be partitioned into a bunch of little pieces that are just waiting to fall apart as soon as you tell them to. So just a bunch of cool magic tricks here. And I'm glad that this presentation went well. So that ought to wrap it up for today. I'm really glad that your performance went as well as it did. And moreover, I'm really happy that your master's program has started off, seems like it started off really smoothly. And about all this stage fright and nervousness and all this kind of stuff, yeah, I'm really kind of intrigued by how you don't experience this type of thing, where you as a performer have to do something more than just talk, which, I don't know, depends on the person. It can be either easier or more difficult, depending on how much you like talking. But for me personally, I get really overwhelmed when I have to give such a long presentation, such as 40 minutes in this case. Even though it was my partner, that still means 20 minutes per person talking. But as it turns out, as I really get into the presentation and just start talking, all the nervousness really just goes away. But there's nothing I can do about the fact that I do get nervous at the beginning, so it's just really this battle of just getting started and just shaking it off in the beginning, and everything else is fine after that. But it wasn't always this way. In high school, I remember all my PowerPoint slides used to literally be like paragraphs, where I would just read off everything word for word, or I would literally bring in like this giant thick script and just read off that script. Having slides which are just videos or images was a nightmare, because what if I didn't know what to say? And so I used to prepare all these memorized lines and all this kind of stuff, which is not a good practice, because if you forget this line, if you blank, if you forget your lines, if you blank out, then there's nothing you can do about it. So a better approach is just to know what it is you're presenting, and just do what I'm doing right now. Basically just talk, in this case to the camera, but just talk to yourself and know what it is you're presenting, so there's nothing really to forget. I'm not the best at talking. I articulate my thoughts best when I have Final Cut Pro in front of me, so I can make all these jump cuts. But I think to a certain extent, having this channel where I'm able to just freely say whatever I want and talk about anything and everything, whatever's on my mind at the present time, really is good practice for someone like me. And I'm really excited to see where this channel goes in the future and what kinds of stuff we'll be talking about in a couple of years' time. So looking forward to our future uploads. And Trish, I'll see you next week.